Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're hanging out with me today because we're going to unpack one of the most fascinating and honestly profoundly confusing psychological overlaps we see in human behavior. We're looking directly at the clinical sources to decode why some people feel this intense need to manage everything around them, and way more importantly, where that drive actually comes from.
So I want you to picture someone for a second. Think of that highly capable, hyper-vigilant adult in your life. You know exactly who I mean, right? The one who anticipates literally every single problem before it even happens. They manage the entire room's mood. They seem to just hold the whole world together. Or, hey, maybe you're actually looking in the mirror right now. From the outside, it looks like they've got everything under total control. But it begs a really serious question. Is this person a grandiose narcissist demanding things go their way, or are they just absolutely terrified?
Okay, let's dive into this. The reason this is so incredibly hard to untangle is that both types of people exhibit these exact same intense behaviors. We're talking micromanaging, chronic hypervigilance, overfunctioning, and just relentlessly seeking control over their environment. Now, we often brush this off as just, being a type A personality. But on a clinical level, these behaviors can stem from two completely different inner worlds. One is driven by a need for admiration and superiority, and the other is a desperate, exhausting trauma response.
We've got a great roadmap to untangle this confusion today. We'll be looking at the illusion of control, the anatomy of a narcissist, the fear-driven controller, how to spot the difference, and finally, breaking the cycle.
Part 1. The illusion of control. Our clinical sources reframe this beautifully. That visible problem, the intense overfunctioning and micromanaging, is actually a highly sophisticated defense system. It's not a sign of success. It's an outdated survival strategy. Think of it kind of like an internal guardian. It's a piece of software installed incredibly early in life to protect the individual against the profound terror of rejection and abandonment. And it just runs quietly in the background of adult life, completely undetected. In Jungian psychology, they actually refer to this as the impossible oscillation. It's a tragic dilemma, really. On one hand, the vulnerable part of you desperately seeks love and connection. But that internal guardian perceives real intimacy and vulnerability as a literal life-threatening danger, because to connect means you can be rejected. So the nervous system frantically attempts to prevent someone from walking away by either attacking the connection or managing it to death.
Part 2. Anatomy of a narcissist.
According to the DSM-5 and our psychological texts, narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a relentless need for admiration, and a fundamental lack of empathy. But paradoxically, underneath this grandiose, entitled facade, the narcissist actually suffers from a chronically fragile, low self-esteem. They're basically incapable of asserting their own internal sense of adequacy, so they have to extract it from the environment around them. Now, what's really interesting about this is that because a narcissist's self-worth is so fragile, they literally cannot risk criticism. When their illusion of superiority gets punctured, what clinicians call a narcissistic injury, they rely on the grandiose defense. They either expand their grandiosity to restore their wounded self-concept, or they use devaluation, tearing down the criticizing person to regain a feeling of superiority. Their control is all about ensuring they remain right there on a pedestal. To see how this actually impacts relationships, we can look to the work of Alice Miller in The Drama of the Gifted Child. She notes that a narcissistic parent views their child merely as an extension of themselves. They use the child to fulfill their own unmet needs, or to project a desired image. The child is loved conditionally, based purely on their ability to perform or conform to the narcissist's expectations. So the control here is exploitative. It's about regulating the narcissist's self-esteem, entirely at the expense of the other person.
Part 3. The fear-driven controller.
So pivoting here, this fear-driven control usually presents in two distinct ways. First up, outward control. This is the person who anticipates every problem, constantly reads the room, and makes themselves so incredibly indispensable that abandonment becomes logistically impossible for the other person. Second is inward control. Instead of managing the environment, they erase themselves. It's chronic people-pleasing, swallowing their own needs, and creating this false self because they believe taking up zero space is a foolproof guarantee against rejection. Both are just desperate shields against isolation. And this brilliantly illustrates the tragic logic of this trauma response. As Jungian analyst Donald Cowshed describes it, this defense system functions like an internal guardian that follows a simple, primitive mandate. To keep you safe from the world, I must keep you isolated from the world. Because the trauma happened early in life, this guardian is absolute in its rigid control. But here's the hidden cost. Cowshed points out a tragic irony. the protector eventually becomes the persecutor. This self-care system turns demonic, attacking the individual with shame, self-hatred, and chronic anxiety whenever they try to be vulnerable or genuinely connect with others. The very control that was meant to secure a connection actually prevents any genuine intimacy. It creates the exact isolation the person was so terrified of to begin with.
Part 4. Spotting the difference. The absolute best diagnostic tool for spotting the difference is observing their reaction to a boundary. When a narcissist faces a boundary or a perceived criticism, they experience a narcissistic injury, and they respond with rage, severe devaluation, or splitting, which is just a psychological term for black and white all-or-nothing thinking. They attack to assert dominance. But when a fear-driven controller faces a boundary, their internal guardian perceives it as impending abandonment. They react with panic, fawning, desperate appeasement, and sheer terror. They don't want dominance. They just want to know you aren't leaving.
I want you to take a mental screenshot of this breakdown because it is your ultimate guide here. Let's compare these traits side by side. Look at the internal state. The narcissist feels entitled, while the fear-driven controller is fundamentally exhausted. Look at the motivation. The narcissist seeks admiration, superiority, and validation. The controller, they just seek safety and connection. And look at empathy. The narcissist has heavily impaired emotional empathy and views others as objects, whereas the fear-driven controller often has overactive empathy, unable to separate their own internal peace from someone else's mood.
To understand where the fear-driven controller actually comes from, we can look at Murray Bowen's family systems theory, specifically the family projection process. Bowen found that a parent's chronic anxiety can settle quietly onto one particular child. This child becomes the vigilant one, the one who reads the room, manages the parent's feelings, and just cannot say no. They absorb the intergenerational trauma and carry it as guilt and hypervigilance, functioning as the emotional manager for the whole family, often without a single raised voice ever occurring.
Part 5. Breaking the cycle. So the crucial point is this 3-step framework drawn from the shadow integration map to short-circuit that old survival algorithm. Step 1 is notice. Use interoceptive awareness. Pay attention to your body. Jaw tension or a collapsed posture is your early warning system that the control pattern is about to run. Step 2 is recognize. Acknowledge the fear out loud. Tell yourself, I'm just feeling afraid of rejection right now. Step 3 is rehearse. If your shadow pattern is to appease, practice setting a small boundary. If your pattern is to dominate the room, practice slowing down and just listening. Ultimately, untangling this behavior requires brutal honesty about what's driving the engine underneath. If it's a narcissist, the engine is grandiosity. But if it's the fear-driven controller, the engine is a terrified guardian trying to keep you safe. So I leave you with this to reflect on in your own relationships. When the anxiety spikes, are you managing the room or are you erasing yourself? It might just be time to start taking your authentic space back.